Hello and welcome to a Conquest, the last Argument of Kings battle report. In this game we're once again playing the Old Dominion against Dweghom, and the scenario is head to head. As always, I'll have full lists in the video description, but in short, this is the list that I am playing this evening, and what we are experimenting with here is a couple of things. We are continuing my current drive to avoid playing Legionnaires to the maximum extent possible by having only one Legionnaire unit in the entire list, and one of the ways that we're doing that is with Kheres MSUs, so lots of small Kheres units. This is a little bit of an experiment for me, although it's kind of non-controversial. Kheres are quite good. You don't need to have Kheres in large units, although they do scale up better than some ranged units do. And the reason for this is that they're not actually very good ranged attackers. They have, I think, the worst ranged attack in the game, or very close to. But they're very potent spellcasters as you get dark power. And even a small unit of Kheres can eventually go up to a Priest 9, which is quite enough to do a lot of damage with Insanity, which is a very good offensive spell. Now, I have previously run them in slightly larger units, mostly so I could hit the cap of Priest 12 for like true Kamehameha like level insanity spells in the late game, but you don't really need that for them to do plenty of damage, and by having them in the multiple small unit formats, you have more mainstay slots, which means you unlock more restricted, and lets you do something like this. So what we have here are two really quite large units of Praetorian Guard, and in stark contrast to Legionnaires, Praetorian Guard are durable. They are tough regiments. Now, they're not unkillable. There are things that will go through them like water. A Tauntaur, for example, or even just a Linebreaker-centric Wardrune list will just do an absolute number on Praetorian Guard. But there's still 25 wounds that don't take resolve checks in those units. And although they don't have standard bearers, I couldn't afford it, they do have Profane Reliquaries, which means that you have 6 stands with the Archimandrite with Aura of Death 2. Now, it isn't a ton, but it's enough to kind of grind its way out of small conflicts for a relatively cheap price for a unit that size. We also have a unit of 4 Bone Golems. Bone Golems are excellent. I really like them. There is no reason not to take them in this list, and it rounds out a little bit of the, like, I have a lot of Aura of Death in this list kind of theme, which is nice. We have a Hierodeacon with Arcane 1 in a unit of Legionnaires. That's essential, unfortunately. And then 4 Karyatids. Something I've been really enjoying recently is Karyatids directly behind Praetorian Guard. It means that if the Praetorian Guard get engaged and you don't have something like a Hierodeacon in them to provide combat power, you just have 4 Karyatids firing at point-blank range, rolling 20 dice, hitting on 3s. And that will leave a mark on basically anything. Otherwise, we're doing very light on character upgrades. We just have Arcane Retinue 1 on the Archimandrite Warlord, and that's literally it. Just enough to push through a little bit more offensive power, mostly because I had 15 points spare. This list is very experimental. I discussed it with some people, and the general consensus was you're going to lose super hard to heavy-based Wardrune, but not sure how it'll do into other stuff, and that was part of this evening's experiment. Now, what we are playing into is a definitely equally experimental Dweghom list that is trying out a mix of strong early and strong late game. The weird thing about this list, and frankly something that it probably doesn't need, is that it has 0 mediums. Now, you should probably have 1 medium, realistically speaking, but the idea here is that functionally the entire list is very likely to be on the table very early into the game. We have the Ardent Kerawegh with Memory of Breath, who would usually, but in this game won't be going in the unit of Flame Berserkers, and then we just have all lights in his warband. 2 Hold Ballistae, they're great, just ranged pressure and counter pressure. Flame Berserkers, they're great with standard bearers, and then with the Ardent Kerawegh, their Aura of Death 3, which is quite impressive. Then we have 2 Warlords, two warbands rather, Hold Raegh, non-Warlord. The Ardent, meanwhile, is giving everything. So the MSU play here is that the Ardent's Supremacy ability will give every command stand +2 attacks, which means that these Dragonslayers and these Thanes, they're rolling like 5 +2 +1. So you're like 8 dice Dragonslayer command stands, which are pretty fearsome. So we have 2 Dragonslayer regiments. One of them has a Mnemancer's Apprentice, which means that when it declares a duel against you, if you refuse, you become broken. And the other one does not, but they all have banners. 2 units of Hold Thanes with Champions of Stone, which I like Champions of Stone, but they are expensive, and they're probably too expensive to put in minimum size units of Hold Thanes, and then 2 Hold Raeghs. Now, the reason why these Hold Raeghs are so expensive is that they're each spending 30 points on Tactical Retinue 3, plus 15 points or 10 points each on like a small combat upgrade. What Tactical 3 gives you is Tier 2 lets you take an extra upgrade, which they're not using. Tier 1 gives you Indomitable, which is excellent, and Tier 3, coming in at 30 points for the entire retinue, gives you flank. So what it means is that on turn 3, potentially you get like 3 auto picks of heavies. So following up on all of these lights, you have all of these heavies, and it's very possible to have the entire army on the field on turn 3, which is pretty impressive. Now, for my money, I think there are a number of things that you should probably change about this, and one of them is that you should have one medium unit. The 2 units of Hold Thanes, in terms of flooding the board, I think there's a lot of merit there, but you actually could guarantee that the whole army is present if you move the second Hold Raegh into Dragonslayers rather than in Hold Thanes, which is where he'll usually go, and you replace that Hold Thane unit with just a decent medium unit, which in this case is probably going to be Warriors. That's fine, they're cheap, you can pad the points out elsewhere. That actually accomplishes the flood the board and also have high quality stuff without going quite so heavy into MSU. And just generally, there's probably too many points of characters here. I like the idea of early game pressure flowing very quickly into late game heavy pressure, but this is a ton of points spent on characters and a ton of like kind of vanity upgrades. I like memory. I like the Stone Champions in the Hold Thanes, but I don't like it in an MSU. You've got very expensive banners. Like all of these units are costly, and when you sum up how many stands the army has, it's actually not that many, as good as Thanes and Dragonslayers are. Also, obviously, it's not a Tempered Creed list. Tempered Creed is very, very good. But the Ardent Kerawegh supremacy ability is no slouch. And if anything can make this kind of MSU style work, it's this. So I think really with only some quite small tweaks, this is very close to, not quite, but it's very close to a viable secondary Dweghom playstyle after Tempered Creed Herder. And I mean, that's honestly unfair. Tempered Creed is awesome and is what I would play if I was playing Dweghom. So I like this as a point of experimentation, but much like my list is very theoretical. We test things to see how they go, so let's see how they go. So scenario first, head to head, it's a classic scenario, it's been around for some time, and what we have are 2 small zones, each of which you have to cross the field to score the opposing one, and then 1 large zone, which is up for grabs by both players. You get 3 points for scoring these ones, and 4 points for scoring these ones, and that's basically the entire scenario, apart from kill points, where you get 2 points for each unit, 2 points for each character, and an extra 2 point for the Warlord. This was a little bit of a rushed game in the sense of like, oh, we just, this is a game of opportunity, so we're playing using flat pack terrain, although we have the wonderful Flock mat, which I'm very big fan of. So in terms of terrain, we're just using my Song of Ice and Fire flat pack stuff. We have dangerous terrain in these stakes here. We have forests, which we're currently playing as obscuring, obstructing, and hindering. So we have a big forest here and a big forest here. And then we have 2 corpse piles, which we're just treating as water. So if a regiment has half of its stands bogged down in the huge pile of bodies, then it has -1 to clash. Apart from that, we have these palisades here and here, which are just impassable, and they are size 2 obstructing. So relatively standard terrain, not a ton of line of sight blocking stuff, but the forests are large enough to have a fairly large effect. In terms of the first turn, I have actually elected to hold back a unit of Kheres, and on top of that, I have had 2 other units of Kheres fail their rolls, which I'm actually totally fine with. There's nothing in this scenario that would push me to bring light units on early. There are no like objectives that I have to destroy. And if I push those Kheres up the board into Flame Berserkers, they are going to get annihilated. Like, it's just going to be done, like, before you can blink. Flame Berserkers are the perfect counter to Kheres. They are natively Resolve 5, which means Insanity just bounces off of them, and they have a high volume of attacks plus Aura of Death, which goes through a low wound count evasion-based unit like butter. So, nothing is coming on, and I'm totally fine with that. And for my opponent's part, he's rushed the board. Everything has turned up. Now, interestingly, a decision he made at the beginning of the game is that the Ardent was going to come on in Ballistae, not in the Berserkers. There are 2 reasons for that. One of them is that he wants to keep the Ardent alive because it's worth quite a lot of points if it dies, but the other is that everything I just said about Kheres like getting annihilated by Flame Berserkers only works if you don't lower the Flame Berserkers resolve against Insanity by putting an Ardent into the unit. Kind of funny that his resolve is lower, but it is so he makes them more vulnerable. So what we have is we have 2 units of Flame Berserkers that are rushing onto the board, and then 2 units of Hold Ballistae. And this is early pressure. This is forcing me back. It's pinning me back considerably. When I turn up next turn, I'm going to have to contend with these things very far forward. Now, one of the things I actually would critique this deployment slightly, and the reason why is that it is very spread out. This is an easy trap to fall into when you are using lots of light regiments, is that you don't want to gum yourself up. But I think this kind of list In this scenario, you need to think about where the early points are going to be scored, and they're going to be scored here. Takes a long time in head-to-head to fight your way between these two zones, and that means that, yes, some pressure in this space is totally fine, but a unit of light flame berserkers I can not exactly ignore, but they don't exert pressure moving in this direction, because they can't score this zone, and I would love to engage a unit of berserkers here, right, and just, cool, totally roadblock any possible advance into this area. What I think should have happened is that both units of Flame Berserkers should have come on like this, and then the Ardent Kerawegh behind. And the reason for that is that then allows this like wall of Flame Berserkers to exert a lot of pressure here, maybe even have Ballistae coming around like this, like focus everything on this space. These 4 light regiments are all that the Dweghom list has until turn 3, and although it's a lot of stuff, and pretty high quality stuff, this is where the battle is going to be fought early on. So push everything, right? Concentrate the force around that space and set the Ardent up for scoring so that you can rack up some points and hold me back with like layers of stuff and do damage. I'm going to end up deploying in a way that will let me slowly fight my way through this stuff. And if there were more things there, then it increases the likelihood, for example, of the unit of Berserkers jumping into a unit of Kheres, stuff like that. So let's move on. So into turn 2 and turn 3, so end of turn 2, beginning of turn 2, end of turn 2, we can see this situation developing. I've moved 1 unit of Kheres on here just to kind of respond to these Ballistae, but you'll see how they're angled, like they're coming in this direction, because I want as much distance as possible between them and these Flame Berserkers. The Legionnaires with Hierodeacon have moved up, and in relatively classic sense, they're not moving up very far. I am giving them ample space that if I want to rush something across the top of them to occupy this space, I can, because I do not want them in melee. I don't want them in melee with Flame Berserkers. I don't want them in melee with anything. Their job is to caddy the Hierodeacon around, generate dark power, get sacrificed for dark power, and then in the late game, have the Hierodeacon alive as a blaster. The 3 stands of Legionnaires, as long as they have alive with 1 wound, they're doing their job, and I don't want them to be put in jeopardy otherwise. Beyond that, we've got the first big unit of Praetorians has arrived. It's in sort of T formation here, with the Archimandrite in the front rank, and they are moving forward to contest the objective. Now, by themselves, they can probably fight their way through this this whole Ballistae and Flame Berserker unit, and you can see that my opponent's not pushed forward too aggressively. Doesn't want to risk me. Like, this is not an overextension. He can lock me out at his discretion later. Right now, he is scoring comfortably and will be getting his first 3 points. The only other thing that's moved on is I've moved the unit of Kheres on here. They are probably slightly too tight behind the Praetorian Guard. I'm getting a little bit cute here, where like they can jump over and do things, and the Praetorian Guard can move over the top with a march. But if the Praetorian Guard get engaged, which I didn't super think about, it's going to take just a little bit too much time for the Kheres to move around. On the other hand, by being so far behind the Praetorian Guard, they're not likely to get charged by Flame Berserkers because they're properly sheltered, which is something I wanted to avoid at all costs, but you can kind of guess where this is going to go. Sure enough, here in turn 3, we can see that my line has not significantly advanced. This Praetorian Guard unit started and ended the turn in the same space. That's weird. I wonder why that is. Well, Flame Berserkers. So, this is where the strength of my list I didn't expect is beginning to emerge. My opponent is going to continue to rack up points, but what we have here is a game plan that probably the heavies, the large number of heavies, doesn't necessarily capitalize on it as well as it might. The list can be made a little bit more optimal, etc. But as a general rule, Old Dominion are susceptible to what is happening here, which is that they are being pinned back. They can only move so many things onto the table at any given time. They tend to be very medium and heavy centric. This list having 3 lights is a colossal amount of light regiments, even medium regiments. Like having only a single heavy by Old Dominion standards is a very light list. There's only 1 unit with Vanguard, and that's Legionnaires, and Legionnaires are not very good, etc. So there's all of this pressure in addition to the dark power mechanic that basically makes Old Dominion just kind of chill for almost the first half of the game. And what that means is that because they're constrained during that time, they're very susceptible to being zoned, to being pushed back, to being pressured while your opponent racks up points. This list that I am playing is kind of accidentally one of the better lists at responding to that kind of pressure that I think I've played with Old Dominion. And it's off the back of all of this range, this sort of these Kheres as capable skirmishing elements, And the healing from the Archimandrites is a lot of chip damage you can heal through with 2 Archimandrite heals every turn. And then the Karyatids just rocking up behind the Praetorians and going full volley. And that's what's happened this turn. So my opponent has made the decision. So I've attempted to move forward, blah, blah, blah. And my opponent has made the decision to lock me out of the zone with the Flame Berserkers. They've marched, they've charged. I don't even know what they needed, but they're very fast. And so they engaged me like this. And I activated Praetorians, I took some wounds, I clashed, I did some damage, the Archimandrite activated, it healed the Praetorians of the damage they took from Aura of Death, it fired an offensive spell, it did some damage, and then the Karyatids walked onto the table and fired a full volley inside effective range and finished off the Flame Berserkers. Now, that in terms of dice, that was like lucky, but not colossally lucky. It was like reasonable, and certainly the damage that I did put me in a situation where next turn, even just activating 6 Aura of Death hits would have killed the last remaining Flame Berserker stand. I could have cleaned it off without any issue, but yeah, okay, cool. I've just killed a expensive Dweghom unit. The cost is 3 scenario points, but I've sought 2 points for killing it, and the pressure that they're attempting to exert, I just don't really feel it. And that is really interesting, and would be the story of this game, is this ability to, because these Praetorian bricks are like durable, robust, and dangerous enough to fight against, like they fight well against pressure. They don't fight against a Tontor or Thunder Riders, but they fight well against pressure. And that is really interesting. And that is a strength that would play out very heavily over the course of the rest of this game. So, otherwise, my opponent has elected to keep back a unit of Dragonslayers so that they can fully see where I deploy. I actually think that was a mistake. I think they wanted to rush the board at this point. They needed to send waves and waves of troops in, secure as overwhelming a scenario lead as possible before I overwhelmed them in turn. They just don't have sufficient numbers to fight me, really. They've got all of these minimum-sized units. They're overspending on kind of like cool but stuff that works as a force multiplier, attempting to force multiply small units, and they're already behind on attrition. So this is just like, this is a struggle for them. They need to adopt these like scenario lockout tactics to have a chance. And so just bring the Dragonslayers on. Don't wait around in order to be able to use the reinforcement lines on your heavies. Just rush them up the field. It'll be fine. That said, we've got 2 units of Thanes moving forward. 1 unit moves forward here, 1 unit moves forward here. Relatively like careful just with the Ballistae and the remaining unit of Flame Berserkers, and the score continues to rack up. So my opponent scores this zone again, which at this point puts them on 6 to my 2, which is, you know, a comfortable lead, but it's not enough at this stage. Moving on to start and end of turn 3, we can see action is beginning to develop, and I am making some pushes here. Now, on the lower flank, on my left flank, not a great deal is happening because I'm having to unstuff myself from the position that I found myself in as a result of the Kheres being tucked in behind the Praetorians. And the Praetorians go for a march charge into this unit of Ballistae. I would be quite comfortable like pinning them in place, scoring this zone, forcing them to retreat. Yes, at that point, lots of things are gonna, attack me, but I think I can handle a minimum unit of Thanes and a minimum unit of Dragonslayers. Not necessarily easily, but I've got stuff that I can force this fight into at least a relative stalemate. If I need to, I can push these Kheres this direction. I've got these Kheres. I've got a lot of firepower coming in, and that adds up. As it is, though, I failed the charge. It was a long distance one. I think it was like a rerollable 5. So these Praetorians just move forward. That's okay. This is fine. Dragonslayers have moved on here. Thanes have moved up behind. There's a little bit of a risk with these Thanes moving up behind the Ballistae, which is that the Ballistae have not got space behind them for the Thanes to actually get into the zone. So if I were able to contest this, I'd be in position to like score it or lock it out or close out that scenario gap just a little bit too quickly. Otherwise, the Karyatids push up. They put some incidental damage into the Ballistae. The Ballistae put some incidental damage into the Praetorians, which I mostly healed with the Archimandrite. More interesting is what's going on my right flank. That's sort of this space up here, where we're just sort of starting to see we've got this unit of Kheres has moved up and around, and Berserkers have popped the Ardent Supremacy and gone for a long bomb charge, which has gotten into the Kheres. Now this was like a march charge that got them all the way in because the Kheres were in a zone, which means they got plus 2 inches of charge movement. And the Kheres then took hits from Aura of Death, and I just pulled them out of combat. And I rolled a 5 for the damage, and so they took a total of 8 wounds from Aura of Death and the withdrawal. So their whole activation was to march and rally. But they're a late game unit. Kheres, like, they don't want to be fighting Flame Berserkers, they will just die, so I had to get them out of there. However, I was able to tie the Flame Berserkers up before the Kheres disengaged. I moved this unit of Praetorians in, and that put the Berserkers kind of in check. They are going to have to like shuffle over, blah blah blah. Like this unit of Praetorians is now holding down the fort, which will give me time for the Archimandrite to reconstitute the Kheres, this like grind to happen. The Praetorians are very well suited to this kind of a grind, and in a vacuum they will pretty easily defeat the Berserkers. They just have to do so before this unit of Dragonslayers moves in, which again, they're coming in off of the flank. This is why my opponent waited a turn, but I think realistically he should have just bum rushed it. There's not a great deal of advantage to be had. Like, if you look at where these Dragonslayers are compared to where they could be, they would be 22 inches up the board, which is basically, it's like there. So not a great deal of speed advantage by holding them for a turn. The only other thing of note that's happened is that these Bone Golems, these are my Bone Golems here, they have moved forward and gotten within 12 inches of this unit of Hold Thanes, and they've just gone for it. They've gone for a charge on a 6. It's rerollable. If I fail, I don't care. And they made it. So they did nothing with the impact attacks because they've moved into water, so they're Clush 1. But the Thanes are also stuck in water, and I just wanted to, like, the point of this maneuver is it cost me nothing if it failed, and if it succeeded, then it pinned down an important unit using fewer points. That unit of, because of the expensive Raegh in that unit, the unit of Bone Golems is cheaper, and they're well suited to winning that fight. And this is a thing that Bone Golems, like, this is really interesting, right? Where Bone Golems, you would think that Hardened 2 stuffs Bone Golems, which are Cleave 2. And like, yeah, absolutely it does, except that Bone Golems are never truly out of options because they only have so many attacks at Cleave 2, and then the remainder of their offensive output is Aura of Death. And Aura of Death is quite good at engaging a unit that has made itself really expensive in order to be Hardened 2. So I take that fight happily in the knowledge that Kheres support will make the difference. Now, that said, again, this has been a turn mostly of development and maneuver. My opponent has finally brought on all of their heavies. The scenario is fully developed. The armies are fully developed, and my opponent scores again, which puts the points at 9-2. But things are beginning to turn my way. In particular, enough dark power has been generated that we click over into dark power tier 2, and that makes a big difference to this list. Now, this is the last turn that I have photos for. I kind of forgot to take photos for the remainder of the game. But this is the decisive turn. And I will explain what happened through this turn and then what happened after. So fighting basically continued, and we can see that the Dragonslayers have begun to move forward. The Dragonslayers have moved in and actually taken the charge. This was a cool one. So the Dragonslayers, there's a long distance here, right, between the Dragonslayers and the Praetorians. But because they have a Mnemancer's Apprentice, what they've done is they've marched, charged, dueled, and broken my Praetorians. And then I activated them and rallied them, and the crackback was pretty prodigious. Because I'm in Dark Power Tier 2 now, these Kheres can do things like move and make a Priest 6 shot into the Dragonslayers with effectively deadly shot, and my opponent is blessed by the ability to roll like 3 6s on that defense roll, and then the Praetorians swing, and the Dragonslayers just start getting like absolutely monstered. And this is not a unit that you want to spend lots of points locking me out of zones again. Kind of same deal, these Thanes have moved forward here to occupy space and begin to zone me out, but there's just not enough stuff left. These Thanes and these Dragonslayers are not, like, by themselves, there's not enough of them to win this fight. Decisively on the left flank, I actually cast, one of the things I wanted to do this game was cast Drain Will, and by God we did. This unit of Kheres moved up here, they cast Drain Will into the Thanes, dropped their defense by 1, then I activated the Bone Golems, and between Aura of Death and the Bone Golems native clash, I did something like 20 hits to the Thanes, which meant actually that was about the break point where giving them -1 defense was going to do more than just popping an Insanity into them. So that was really cool, and yeah, it did a ton of damage to the Thanes. By the time they activated, they were down to just the Aura of Death, put them down to just the Hold Raegh and the Command Stand. The downside of that, of course, is that this is an Ardent Kerawegh list, so the command stand goes absolutely hard, but it's not enough to fight this unit of Bone Golems. They're now going to win this fight, because the Dragonslayers are sort of still hustling onto the scene, you can see that the Kheres here have turned around and they're now back up to 2 stands. And over the course of the next turn, they're going to go back up to 3 stands, then they're going to activate, they're going to do a whole bunch of damage. they're gonna do like 4 wounds to these Dragonslayers. The Dragonslayers are gonna be forced to kill them. They actually won't quite kill them. They'll leave them alive with like a wound. These Flame Berserkers are going to die. The whole Ballistae are actually going to charge the Bone Golems and then eventually die. And the most important thing that will happen next turn is that these Kheres are going to pop an Insanity into, this Hold Raegh unit, which will kill him, and then charge. And that charge, what that means is that these Dragonslayers are going to activate, they're going to declare a duel, they're going to break the Archimandrite's unit. But in breaking the Archimandrite's unit and then doing a bunch of damage, as long as my opponent can't then make this charge, do more damage, and then duel out and kill the Archimandrite, I'm happy. So I just had to stall these guys out, and that was the job of the Kheres after having cast an Insanity. And that would make these Kheres, by the time we sort of like called the game, this Kheres was the only unit that was destroyed, although it was highly likely that this Kheres unit was going to go down as well. And although I was probably going to lose this Praetorian unit to the Dragonslayers, it's actually a surprisingly close fight because of like just aura of death, lots of hits, and once I'm inspired, which I will be soon, that's actually a lot of hits that come out of this regiment. I certainly can contest the Dragonslayers for enough time that these Bone Golems are going to make it onto this zone, I'm going to thoroughly secure this objective, and then I just have to tick down the last 2 turns. I'm up on points almost already by this juncture, purely because of kills, and the remaining few turns are going to tick me through to, 7 points a turn, 7 points a turn, 7 points a turn. So we play out one more turn after this, and then we're like, yep, no, look, this game state is fully resolved, and if I leave the game now, I can beat the roadworks on the Parkway. I couldn't do that. They started an hour early, but that's neither here nor there. So ultimately, this is a decisive victory for the Old Dominion. An experimental Old Dominion list against an experimental Dweghom list. Definitely, the Dweghom list has some tweaking that it needs to do, but I am surprisingly happy with this OD list. The Kheres, I've been playing units of 4 Kheres, and I probably need to just put that away. I probably need to just be like, you know what, 3 units MSU as a support spellcaster. I love support spellcasters. That's my jam. So very enthusiastic to play some more of this. Although I'm sure that Insanity is going to be one of those things that many people are just like, yep, hate that spell. It's really good. Yes, it is really good. It's really good if you get to tier 3 and the Kheres are still alive. If you're playing against Old Dominion, kill the Kheres. I had to extend quite a lot of resources in order to stop them from dying, and I still lost 2 of the 3 units by the game end. They're good for that reason. They're important for that reason. Anyway, if you're interested in the lists, you can find them in the video description down below. As always, if you like this video and want to support what I'm doing, there is a Buy Me a Coffee page that you can find in a pinned comment or in the video description. I mostly prefer to use Buy Me a Coffee over something like Patreon because it is better for one-off donations. I can't post these videos super regularly. I have a work schedule, etc. And so just being able to be like, hey, I enjoyed this, thanks very much, that's better suited than an ongoing subscription, even if an ongoing subscription probably earn a whole lot more money. I'm not doing this for money, but it is nice to have some support. So I hope you enjoyed this. There will be more videos to come. Hopefully some Infinity, hopefully some Song of Ice and Fire, and hopefully some Conquest. As always, I will see you next time.